Physicians are lousy business people. That's what some people say about you. That's what you often say about yourselves in talking about how you don't get business training in medical school. There's one entrepreneur in the medical space, a physician that you're familiar with because he's been on the show so many darn times, Dr. Francisco Arredondo, starting a new practice. Again, has been involved in other ventures. Like I said, last time on the show, I didn't even know that he was on the MATE board or that he had started his foundation because he's an entrepreneur and he's doing so many different things. And he has a book called MedikalPreneur, and we explore what he calls as this myth that physicians are lousy business people. And you know me, I tend to be, at least sometimes, I'm an extreme centrist. So I don't think it's a complete myth, but I also think that it's something that people on the business side say to cover up for us being sucky business people sometimes. I think that there is a crutch that physicians are able to lean on that most business people cannot, because you're so skilled and in demand professionals. But that does impact when you're building an entrepreneurial venture. Now you're competing against entrepreneurial ventures. So we go through the book MedikalPreneur. We talk about negotiation, hiring, accounting, the reasons to be a MedikalPreneur, the management and accountability chart. So please enjoy my guest again, Dr. Francisco Arredondo, talking about MedikalPreneur. Dr. Arredondo, Paco, welcome back to Inside Reproductive Health. Now your fourth time on the show.
Yeah.
So you're busy because the first time I think it was probably almost 2 years ago, and a year and a half ago maybe. That was about when you were starting to come up with the concept for MedikalPreneur, and you were starting to lay out the book. Then you came on to talk about what it was like to own and sell a business. Then you were on recently to talk about training OBGYNs. But now we're talking about the book itself. It is written, it's published. I've got a physical copy in my hand right here. It's called MedikalPreneur, the official guidebook for physician success in business. And I'm going to read the intro of why I wrote this book. This is you saying why you wrote the book. I want to change the mentality as well as the mythology that physicians are lousy business people. Physicians can be great entrepreneurs. They just don't know it. So why don't you talk about a little bit about why this book and the case that you're making in this book.
Yeah, well, it is just thank you very much for the invitation once more. And I'm really happy to see that the show has been growing in audience and a lot of talk among all our colleagues. So it seems like people are listening to the show. So I grew up always hearing that physicians were lousy entrepreneurs or lousy business people. And in a sense, I did believe that. And perhaps because I did believe that, I started studying more and learning more. And I have always liked to learn and read things outside medicine. But then as I became an entrepreneur and start developing our own ventures, I realized that the software of the mind that it's required to be a good entrepreneur, and actually the hardware is already there. I mean, that we have as a physician very solid basis to be great business people and entrepreneurs, especially in the third millennium, in the 21st century.
So I think that the operative word in your intro is that physicians can be great entrepreneurs. I don't know if you're arguing that they are great entrepreneurs. I don't really think you are in the book. I think you're saying they can be great entrepreneurs, and here's the framework for them to think about it. I don't know if it's a myth, but I do. Anyway, it's too the axiom that physicians are lousy business people is too broad to be accurate for me. And what I mean by that is I think that it's often an excuse for other business people to use that myth as an excuse for not creating enough value. Yeah, everybody in the field says it. So for all you doctors walking by the people in the booths, all the people in those booths are saying that physicians are lousy business people. They say it all the time. I hear it all the time. I said it early on, and then I started correcting myself for two reasons. One, it's as a business person, you always have to put the onus back on yourself. So if I'm saying, because basically what I'm saying is my customer doesn't know what they want, and that's a telltale sign of a lousy business person. So that would mean that I'm a lousy business person. But more specifically, I think this is where it gets kind of accurate, is that I think that physicians and especially subspecialists who are in demand are like skilled tradespeople that can often get away with bad habits in business that many business people cannot. So like REI, there's 1,100 of you in the country. As you've talked about on the show several times, we're serving a fraction of the population that could be served. We have a shortage of electricians. We have a shortage of plumbers. If I need to get my toilet fixed, it doesn't matter if my plumber stinks at most of the aspects of business. There are that few of them, and I need one right now. And so I think that there are a lot of things that physicians can get away with that many businesses cannot, because they're so in demand, because they're so the licensure and the knowledge required for their craft is so high. That like Domino's Pizza can't do that because everybody can sell pizza. So Domino's has to be or Papa John's has to be a really sharply run business. How would you respond to that?
No, I think you are totally correct. And we become a little bit less disciplined because fortunately our industry as a general healthcare is generous. It's becoming less generous in the margins and everything, but it traditionally has been very generous. But I would say two things regarding the premise of why I do agree with you that nobody is trained as a business person or entrepreneur, but that I mentioned in the book the difference between hardware and software. And in the hardware, in the 21st century, in the third millennium, whoever does business just to make money is out of the game. You actually have to look at the money as the bypass product of the end. And the end is to add value, to create a solution for a problem, and the money will come in. So if you think about it, physicians are very good at listening to a problem, trying to figure it out, diagnosing, and creating a solution. Two, physicians are very good at reading patterns, which is indispensable for business. They are very hard workers, which is indispensable for a good success in business. We make decisions with imperfect information, which is essential for business. We have all the hardware, the good ethics, the good intention to solve problems. We just require a little bit of discipline and business discipline. But even with our quote unquote bad discipline, because we don't learn it in school, which is changing, fortunately, I think that if you look in the statistics, if you have 100 business that open today, I believe the statistics, and they're more accurate in the book, it's like 50% cancel, they're done in 1 year. By the third year, like 75%, and very few survive more than 5 years, less than 10%, something like that. When have you seen that a doctor closes their office? Very rare. So even if
well, that's what I mean, though, Paco. The rest of us are faced with that sort of Damocles, and I see that more as evidence of they don't have to be as entrepreneurial. They're that in demand. And where the rest of us are dealing with that reality. Nobody's like, oh, we need more marketers out there. I really need to craft a niche. I need to develop the firm itself. And I think that because marketing firms do close and they do follow that pattern that you just described, and because practices don't follow that, I think that's what lets them get away with bad habits.
Yeah, there is no question that there is, in general, as a physician, a demand and supply issue that is in your favor. I believe that by 2050, we're going to have like 40,000 shortage of physicians in the United States because also the medical schools are not producing enough. So yeah, I do think that there is an element of that. However, I do think that physicians have a lot of the capabilities. And there's another very important distinction to make, that there is, and the book doesn't address these from the name, but there is a different software that you need for being a good manager or an entrepreneur. And sometimes these are actually counter-intuitive. They are an opposite. Because an entrepreneur entails that you're going to create new ideas, that you're going to take risks, that you're going to fail, that you're going to innovate. And actually, to be a good manager implies that you have to be very good at consistency, very good at precision, very good at repetition. So having navigate both sides, it is very important as a physician, a medical professional, to understand my role right now is as an entrepreneur. So I have to innovate, I have to think out of the box, I have to break some rules, if you may, I have to, and then when you create the idea and implement it, now you have to be a good manager. And you see it, even I see it right now in our industry, where you have great entrepreneurs out there that come up with great ideas, but then they don't know how to handle the boat. They're great architects of thinking ideas, but then they don't have the ability to do the boat. So it's just an important concept that I think we need to think that there are different softwares. It's no different than being a very good clinician and then a good division director. You require different skills also. So being a good teacher and being a good clinician, they're different skills. And here in business, the entrepreneur is different than the manager. There are some overlap skills, but
there can be. There are some people who are really good, but what you're talking about is that entrepreneurs tend to be higher in trait openness and managers tend to be a little bit lower in trait openness. Entrepreneurs might be lower on trait conscientiousness. Managers tend to be higher in trait conscientiousness. Of course, you can find some overlap, but often they are different profiles. And so let's talk about that a bit, about why someone would want to do this. You give 3 reasons to be a medicalpreneur. Off the top of my head, it's freedom, prosperity. I'm flipping open to page 41, and satisfaction and fulfillment. And so talk about what a medicalpreneur has access to. Why does a medicalpreneur have access to more of those things than an employee? Let's say freedom, infinite potential for prosperity and helping people, and satisfaction and fulfillment.
Well, I think that the freedom is obvious because you construct your own destiny, and you define and choose who your team is. You define and you control your agenda, your time. So there is a lot of control and independence that you get with that. Now, as you know, being yourself an entrepreneur too, is that when you say that, you really have to love what you do, because in a sense, you're doing it 24 hours a day. So when I say freedom, it means that you love what you do, otherwise you wouldn't do it. Because we are thinking in the enterprise 24 hours a day. Obviously, we need the breaks, and it's very good to have the detachment from reality. So that is the now when you're an employee, you have the security of a paycheck. You have the security of a umbrella and somebody else to do other things for you. But I think that entrepreneurship is not for everybody, and management is not for everybody. But you have a limited amount of things that you can explore outside of what you were trained to do. It is certainly limited in that sense.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that, Trey, because I think that's a great way of describing the freedoms that entrepreneurs have. If I was an employee for someplace, I can't just say, we're starting a podcast tomorrow. I could potentially pitch that to bosses, but this is what I wanted to explore and the different areas of business that I've wanted. If I were just a salesman, I probably wouldn't have studied finance as much as I have as an entrepreneur, and so, or a business owner. And so that's part of where entrepreneurs really, I think, do have more freedom. Now, we should probably talk about the flip side of that, which is the transition from the transition to owning a business from being owned by the business is the great struggle that every entrepreneur signs up for. And many of them don't make it to that other side of really owning the business as opposed to it owning you. Everything that happens in the business is at some point down the line a cause of the limitations of the entrepreneur. If something happens in my business, it's my fault. It doesn't matter if it's a junior copywriter that writes something that, that's under my creative direct. Even if it's someone else is responsible for it, it's either a process I didn't put in place, or I didn't properly coach the person to put that in place, or I'm flawed as a recruiter that I can't get the right people, or I'm flawed as a salesman that I can't sell fast enough to afford the right people faster. Yeah, everything is the fault of the entrepreneur at the end of the day, and you never get to just blame somebody else. And that doesn't feel like freedom to a lot of people.
Yeah, you have 100% vicarious responsibility and vicarious liability of a lot of the things. But that also gives you, when you have a lot of successes that you will not be able to do them just by yourself, you also harvest those. So it is a balance in a sense that you accomplish things that you know perfectly well that you will not be able to do them otherwise. So I think there is a balance, and as an entrepreneur, you like those risks.
Let's talk about some of the problems that people are signing up to solve, and then what that's like in today's hiring landscape. So you talk about in the book that their problem is our problem to solve, like a customer service attitude. Yep. Can you talk about how you implemented that in practice originally?
Well, one of the things is, and I don't know if you and I have different views here on this or not, but a lot of people, and especially a lot of the companies and a lot of the people with the business savvy, have sold the idea to certain physicians that, oh, we want you only to do medicine. We will take care of the rest. That is the biggest nonsense of all time. Why? It is proven scientifically in a lot of the studies that, for example, whenever you separate the clinical from the administrative, actually you start committing more mistakes. For example, there is a reason what are the two biggest and most successful medical centers in the world, or the three, if you may: Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, Johns Hopkins. From day one, the leader is a physician. From day one till this day. And they don't admit anybody that is not a physician as a leader, because the person has been on the trenches until, like Dr. Cosgrove from Cleveland Clinic, he used to have 1 day a week seeing patients till these days. Why? Because that is the only way that you are directly into the trenches. When these people are in the ivory tower, the business people in the ivory tower up here, and they don't understand what the nurse that is outside there is struggling, what is the immediate patient struggle to pay a bill or to do this, they will never understand. They will never understand. They may have an idea, but they never understand. There is the same reason why the best coaches of NBA have been basketball players. The best race car drivers, team leaders have been pilots. So it is so important, and not everybody can or would like to be an executive as a physician, but it is so important that the only person, and there is scientific evidence that the best way to evaluate another physician is another physician. So the hiring has to be done by physicians to physicians. And there is plenty of evidence. I think I quoted there a Harvard Business Review article where they look at the quality measures of hospitals where the physician was the chief executive versus a non-physician. And it is significantly higher. So now, that doesn't mean that the business people have no role to play in healthcare. That's nothing further from the truth. I mean, you need, and physicians need to be more open and less closed-minded to learn from other industries, which we do not. I would say that's a general rule. A lot of physicians do not like to listen or to look outside of the healthcare to learn. I mean, let me give you an example. You go to any IVF centers and the inventory is done by old-fashioned mom and pop schools. And anywhere the inventory is like totally automatized right now. We can learn from them. So I would say that we should not fall trap into the, you do only physician work and we do the business. They both have to be at the top, intermingle.
I've been dubious that they can be totally separated. Whenever I have the CEO of a network on and everyone said, we never interfere in clinical operations. I don't see how you can't totally separate them.
It's nonsense. Yes.
And even if you do have a chief medical officer making those calls, even if you do have a CEO that's a physician, they're still going to make calls that impact like protocols. And I just don't see how you can totally separate those two. I give the example of ultrasounds, for example. We have one of our clients is just an amazing doc, loves their patients, and this person does all of their own ultrasounds. I know they could be seeing more patients, but they want to do their own ultrasound. That's fine. That's their decision. But if I were the owner of a network and my chief medical officer says, No, docs don't need to. And maybe my of course, my chief medical officer is a doctor, and that individual doesn't see they don't do all their own ultrasounds. And they say, yeah, docs don't need to do all their own ultrasound. Okay, well, then that's our policy now. I just don't see how you can totally separate those.
Yeah, you can separate them. And in fact, I hear people that come from different healthcare industries and walk into a different healthcare industry. And because I'm a healthcare industry expert, then I can help you. For example, I was the national director of a lab company, and now I'm coming to a fertility company. What does that one has to do with another? Imagine this example that I'm going to put to you. Who has been the best basketball team coaches of the whole history? It is Phil Jackson in the Bulls in Chicago. They had an 81% winning rate. Nobody has ever done that. The 5 people were NBA players, etc. Nobody can argue that is the best team of coaches in the entire world and history of basketball. Imagine that you grab them and you put them to coach the Dallas Cowboys or the Yankees. Are they going to be successful? They will figure it out. There's no question. There is no question that they will figure it out in 5 years or 8 years. But in the meantime, they don't know who's selling the peanuts, what kind of incentives the players have with this, what kind of tricks do they do, what kind of socks they are comfortable with. They don't know all the nuances of the actual industry, what they are. And here we have people that are, as I mentioned to you, if you and I go in to a restaurant and we are actually, we like the restaurant and we put a review, or we don't like the restaurant, we put a review. Is our opinion valid? No question, it's very valid. But does that make us food industry experts? By no means. I don't even know who's in the kitchen, what are the incentives, how do they pay? And we have people in our field that just because they were patients, now they are actually they understand everything about fertility. It helps you. There's no question. There's an empathy issue, but that doesn't make you an expert. I think the expert, it is the physician that has been doing this for a while. And again, the physician needs to learn from the business. No question about it.
Right. It can give you insights in so far as I have insights into the public school system from having been produced by it as a student, but that doesn't mean I really know how to run a school. So I've never been a teacher. I've never been an administrator. I've never worked in a school. And so you can get insights, but so that's what every entrepreneur finds out though, isn't it? Is that entrepreneurs kind of get to where they are and they're working for somebody else when they think, I could do that. And then you go off and start your own. You're like, oh gosh, there was so much that I didn't know. This is really tough. And so I want to talk a little bit about why I think it is that, like what you were talking about with the CEO of the Mayo Clinic, CEO of the Cleveland Clinic, and why we don't often see a physician at the helm in the CEO role. So I'm going to share my screen for everybody listening on the podcast. It's going to be theater of the mind, but you can go to fertilitybridge.com to see this. And I really need to customize this chart to the fertility field, but this is an accountability chart for many businesses, in that you have your visionary at the top. That's who you were talking about, the architect in the book. You talk about the visionary as the architect. You talk about the manager as the captain, in this case, the integrator. And then you have different departments. You got your sales and marketing. Your 3 core functions of any business are sales and marketing, operations, finance, and admin. And I might break off HR apart from finance and admin because I think it's something different. In our field, you might break operations into 2, lab and clinic, but they're quite similar. And the problem is, Paco, is that you have a lot of seats underneath these seats, and the person who owns the practice is in a lot of them, and they devote most of their time down here because that's their production role. Their production role as a physician is, I'm an REI. I have to see 40 patients a month or 30 patients a month, and I need to do 15, 20, 30, 40, however many they're doing cycles a month. And so they first fill up their time in this seat, which isn't even on my chart here, it's below here, because they have their production requirements. Whereas I feel like if I were if I were an REI that wanted to build something big, I would keep my production role as small as possible, really only for the purpose of just staying current with the pay. Like you said, the one CEO, I think it was Mayo, that saw patients once a week.
Both Mayo and Cleveland, they do. They have one day a week to see the patients. And
but in our field, it's often flip. Like maybe business that maybe physicians will have one admin day a week, maybe, and that's also admin. That's not like visionary work, and so. I think it's flipped for a lot of the visionaries in our field. And I think when people are looking at this, they're like, do I want to be in this visionary role and see as few patients as possible? Or is it better for me to see as many patients as I can and then just kind of plug in a patchwork for other people in the business? I think they often do the latter.
Oh, it's a dilemma. And we mentioned it that, with the shortage that we have of physicians, we have to be clever to think and innovate outside the current business models where we use everybody at the top of our license. And there are certain tasks that a reproductive endocrinology, in my view, should not be doing. I mean, you could do it and you should know how to do it so you can teach people to do it. But if you want to run this system efficient, you really have to use advanced practitioners. You have to use PAs, nurse practitioners, and now AI in order to maximize your productivity. And the balance of how much clinical versus visionary work you have to do, I think it's an individual decision making, and also it is a circumstance. When you're early in an enterprise, you have to wear all the hats, and then later on you start, dividing it.
You owned your last practice for 10 or 12 years before you sold it. How long did?
14 years, 13, 14
years. Okay. We're at the end of those 13 years. Were you doing as much production work as you were in the beginning?
No, in fact, when I used to be the chief medical officer of Inception, I used to have 2 days clinic a week only. So, and before that, I would say I had 3 days. So it was half and half.
What do you think the number?
Granted that I have a superb team. I mean, the team was superb and they did a lot of the work and they were very, very good. And I could not be happier than that.
So that's my question too, is like, at what point do you think somebody can start to do that where they are only maybe doing 2 clinic days or 1 clinic? I mean, do they need to be working with 6, 7, 8, 10 doctors before?
I would say when you already have 4 physicians, if the vision is to increase and grow the practice and to make it thrive, because one of the other mistakes that a lot of industries do is that they think on growth. And, the only thing that grows is cancer, and that multiple cells are not good when they keep on growing without any measurement. You don't want the economy just to grow. You want the economy to thrive. So when you want a company to thrive, and then make it grow, that's a different way to do it. When you want it to thrive, I would say that even when you are at 3 to 4 physicians, you need one of those individuals to take a significant 25% of their role dedicated exclusively to do the vision, the growth, the standardization. There is actually a very nice book that is called Growing Pains, and it points out how the different levels of growth and how at different points of revenue, you really have to standardize the procedures, create the basics of the human resources. Because when we open the clinic, 1-2 physicians, we just open it with basically no mission statement, no nothing. We're going to change, hang the shingle there and keep the patients coming. But there is no corporate structure and there's no basis. And then when we try to do it after we have 10 physicians, that's too much. And because it is too much, because now everybody has a different philosophy. And this is the other thing that happens. That when you grow, you have different cultures. And when you see these companies that are growing not by organic growth, that they go and build another one and build another one from the inception and go and go up, but they actually just grow by acquiring companies, what happens is that they're buying problems. They're buying everybody, all the private equity people focus on the ledger and on the numbers, and very few focus on the culture. And it is the reverse. You have to define what is the culture that you have to
well, they're not there because they don't have a centralized culture that they're buying. They're buying a number of different practices that don't have a uniform culture.
You have to create the uniform. Where are the points of congruence of all those, and create it, define it, and then all the financial elements and everything else will fall into place. But they do it backwards, and then they are focused only on the monies and the synergies and all this, and the culture. Everybody does whatever they want.
I said that when Gina Bartesi came on the show, I said that I think that is a huge advantage that people underestimate about Kindbody. And people can say whatever they want about. I'm not qualified to evaluate every piece of a business. I own a client services firm. What I do feel really qualified to analyze is centralized cogent and coherent messaging, and they've got that in spades. You can see you're rallying around one thing, and I don't know everything about their HR, but and there's a lot more to delivery than just brand, but it certainly is a huge advantage to structure a culture system, including down to the procedural HR process level when you have that central theme. And I think that's a huge I just think that's a huge challenge that private equity networks have. I wonder about their ability to do economies of scale if they can't plug it into one culture. But then they're always piecemealing, they're always patchworking at that point.
Yeah, it's like, sometimes you buy an old house and it's better just to demolish it and put it from the ground up. Then try to fix it.
You might own the practice, you might manage the practice. In either event, you want to likely get more productivity from your staff without driving them crazy, meaning getting more productivity from them by actually helping them and by actually helping your patients, improving their experience. You've heard me talk a lot about Engaged MD. Different practices have signed up for it because they heard it on the show. I've begged you, the audience, to send me an email if you had a negative experience with Engaged MD, and I still haven't gotten one. And so if you still don't want to take my word for it as someone who just talks to practices, then you can see what the practices themselves are saying. Just go to the engagedmd.com homepage. You scroll right down to the bottom. You're going to see testimonial after testimonial talking about reducing the length of appointments. What used to be an hour or 90-minute appointment is now 15 minutes because the patient is better educated and they're asking questions that are specific to them instead of general questions. And they're happier about that because the information that they are getting is more informed. It's a better educated question that they're getting the answer to, and it's personalized to them. And then you're going to see logo after logo of every kind of fertility center. There are independently owned small groups. There are huge network groups. There are academic centers. Every kind of fertility center works with Engaged MD. And like I told you, I still have not heard one bad. I'm not saying it's not out there, but I'm begging people to send me an email if that's the case, and I haven't gotten it. All I hear is that it's one of the biggest things that has allowed people to relieve their staff at a time when staff are swamped and where patients are overwhelmed with everything else happening in life, to give them a better experience so that they have more rapport and better education when they're interacting with your team. And by the way, informed consent is a whole nother thing that we could talk about. But in the meantime, maybe you focus on this workload piece and just see what other practices are doing. If you go to engagedmd.com/Griffin, they'll do a free workflow analysis for you. It's free. Just tell them my name, say that you heard it on the podcast. You can see what other practices are doing, and you can see any gaps that you might be missing. But now is the time to do this, because it adds so much value at a place and time when staff are swamped out of their minds and patients are constantly looking to be delighted. And it's so hard to delight them when staff are so overwhelmed. engagedmd.com/Griffin. Enjoy the rest of the episode. Let's talk about that culture then. You have your 5 H's for hiring, and I will read those to our listeners here. Don't worry, guys. You don't need an Audible subscription. You can just listen to my raspy voice. Hungry, humble, happy, honest, human skills. All 5 of those are what you describe as making for A players. But what I really want to hear from you is you are starting a new practice group now, right? Positive IVF. And in 2022, and then there's other ventures that you're associated with. And you first made RMA of Texas in the mid 2000s. Is that right? And so
in 2006, yeah.
So in 2006, there was not baby boomers had not yet begun to retire, and millennials were just barely arriving in the workforce. Me and a couple other 21-year-olds, and so it. Contrast that with today, and now baby boomers are not entirely retired, but it seems like 75% at this point, and now millennials aren't even the youngest generation anymore. We have a new one. So talk about what it's like trying to live up to all 5 H's today in 2022 versus what it was like 16 years ago.
Well, certainly we have a shortage of talent. But I think once more, if you have a good idea that resonates with the team members, they will join that vision. Fortunately for our new team here, that is actually our old team. My partner and lab director, Tony Anderson, we've been working together for more than 14 years. The fertility coach, the nurse, I have been working for her for 20 years since I was in Cleveland. So everybody's, it's a tribe. So it's a tribe. But in this era, I think that it's still valid that if you have a good philosophy of the practice that really resonates with the values of the new millennials, it will thrive. The millennials are much more collaborative and less competitive, and you need to appeal to that. I would say also that you have to have a mission in your company. It's no longer about the money only. And more important, I honestly believe that the great leaders are not the ones that have followers. The great leaders are the people that empower others to become leaders. In our next past venture, I think 5 or 6 people in our teams had their own business while working for us, and we stimulated. Yeah, go and do that, go and do that, go and do that, because we have to create other leaders, but a lot of the times the leaders that are not A people, because A people will always hire A people, and B people will always hire C people because they're scared of themselves. They're scared. So I have no question hiring somebody that knows much more. And everybody knows in that there's a lot of things that I'm not good at, but I welcome that. And I know what I can do, and I know what the other person can do. So I think that if you create an environment where you set those rules, that you can say, hey, you come here and you can be a leader. We will allow you to be a leader. And in the time you might leave, that's fine. Good for you. You should not be scared, especially on an industry like ours, that 90 or 85% of the market is untapped. That's why we have to be more collaborative in our industry. Instead of carrying all the cards close to your chest, that's the business of the 1950s. Nowadays, you have to be collaborative, share ideas, and everything is going to come back in a much better way for your company.
So I want to talk about that mission and values because I see both sides of the sword. On one side, it's where I've built my company on 5 values, and we evaluate the team with that, and I use it in hiring, and I try to live up to them. And I try to, for some of our clients now that haven't done branding work yet, I'm trying to get them to do branding for their next initiative, even though they're doing very well. And so they're kind of thinking, well, what do we need to upgrade our brand for if we're perfectly busy with volumes? And it's like, well, but you also have people that are not coming into work, or not coming into or they're not showing up for interviews. And it's partly because to be a desirable place to work requires being someone that communicates a mission and values that's really attractive. And you've got more competition there than you ever have before, to your point. And people want to be involved with that. What I see the other side happening, i.e. employees boycotting Netflix, i.e. some Spotify and some other places, is that eventually if the mission, the values, like any religion, eventually the congregation, the faithful, as it were, are going to split into the practical and ultimately the ideal. And there comes to be a point where you can't live up to the ideal because we live in the real world, or somebody has a different version of it in their head. And so I see some companies right now being ransomed by their own ideals and their own missions. Well, this isn't what we really stood out for. And I see the tension. So I wonder if you can talk about a bit about that. Of eventually the entrepreneur has to say, okay, well, but this is what I mean by these values. And no, I'm not just going to let you be a mob that guides the values of this company. This is what they actually mean.
Oh, I think, this reminds me a lot of a book that I was recommended recently that I just finished, that is called Productive Tensions. And these guys go over 8 different tensions that ought to be in every single company. And you need to balance that tension. We mentioned one of them, which was the natural tension of being medical exact. Because if you fail, you can kill people, but at the same time, you have to innovate, because if not, you're going to miss opportunities. So that's a tension. And in this particular case of what we're talking about of employees, I personally think that the current millennials are people that are going to, in average, have 5 or 6 different careers in their lives. So it would be silly to think on the mentality of the 1920s or 40s or 50s of IBM, that you expect an employee to be
5 or 6 different careers, not 5 or 6 different jobs, but 5 or 6 different careers. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. I think the number of jobs will be way more than that.
Much more than that.
Yeah.
So I think that it will be, if we don't adapt to that as entrepreneurs, as managers, that we understand that sometimes these people are going to go in a different direction. So it's better for us and for society to give them the tools to become leaders and to help us out to build the company. For example, in this company that we created, we have made the decision that we are not going to put non-competes on any healthcare provider, because I believe that the people won't leave because we're going to treat them so well. They're going to be so happy here that they're not going to leave. And I think that we're very committed. Things may change, but I think we are so committed to that, because the moment you put a non-compete, you basically bought the right to mistreat that physician, because they can go anywhere else. And so we're very clear on that. Things may change in the future, but I think that
the counter argument to that, Paco, is that I bought the right to invest in my physician because I'm going to share all of these things with them, and then they can't just take it across the street.
What did we invest? I mean, we basically, the only way that
I introduced them to my OBGYN network. I diverted my call center to take my wait list and bring those patients to them. I used my marketing department to funnel their social media, the benefits that I vested in them, the training that they didn't get in fellowship, to your point, I gave to them that first year.
And the plane would not have flown without that pilot. So you would not have sold tickets. So the plane and all those tickets that you sold would not have been flown if you didn't have that pilot. So there is a synergy. So again, it's an all nor a none. I think that, the people should pay something or learn at the beginning and not have a high salary, as unfortunately right now, or fortunately for all the people that are graduating are getting, because what happens is that there are people that are graduating that are earning more than the people that have been there for a while. And, that's also unfair, but it is what it is supply and demand.
Well, so let's go to the first H in your 5 H's, which is hungry, which is now, I think it can be hard to find people that are hungry in different areas, because there's more food on the table. And I really want to build a company that is that treats their employees super well, that is a cut above the market. And it's hard to be able to get to a place when there are those tensions in play. And I'll come back to that tension, because you referenced the different tension. But when you see so many people right now that either don't show up to an interview, or they barely do a follow-up, and it's like, I just need to see a little bit more hunger to hire you. And I see less of that now than I did even 3 years ago. And I see people on LinkedIn saying, well, employees are getting what they're worth now. It's like, well, they're getting what they're worth now. If we dump a ton of money into the marketplace, and that makes housing prices go up, that's what that does to housing inventory. That's what housing is worth now. If there's a big dip, then they'll be worth something different. And I think we've swung so far to one way that it can be hard to screen for that first H. It can be hard to find somebody who's really hungry, because recruiters are everywhere offering them food. Here's a job here. Here's another job. Here's a promotion. Yeah. And so I wonder if you found that yet.
Yeah. Fortunately, we haven't had that challenge, but I do see a lot of people having those challenges. We have to admit that this is a very unusual circumstances that we have. Pandemias happen only every 100 years. So this post-pandemia is a very unique time. These allow a lot of people to reflect and reset their values. So I think that it's going to come back to a little bit more to the middle, but it's not going to go back to before, that's for sure. So I think that in that sense, it's a little bit unfair to judge what's going to happen in the next 2 years of what is happening right now. But the people are not going to work unless they have at least 1-2 days remote work. Because now it's a norm. So we have to change the way in the business model. And this is our argument for fertility. We've been practicing fertility the same way since 1978, IVF, the same way. We need to think differently. So hungry, it is certainly difficult to assess at this point, but I think you can tell, if not in the interview, immediately in the first 90 days, you can tell who is hungry. So then you go to the other age.
People might be hungrier if there's a dip in the market and unemployment goes up to 12%. Hunger seems to be lower than it does normally, but I still think it's worth. I still think that it's worth screening for, even in today's day and age. The solution is that you have to invest more in what the candidates see in your company, so that they are hungrier for that. If there's more food in the marketplace, more jobs and more money, etc., then they need to see something in yours that makes them still want that more, despite all of the other options on the table. And when I talk about tension, though, in terms of culture, Paco, is what I'm really seeing is that the customer experience almost everywhere has suffered from, whether it's professional services firms or hospital systems that are understaffed with nurses, or if it's the roofing company that finishes the job halfway and then doesn't do it again for another 3.5 weeks because they have so many jobs, or the restaurant that used to be instant and they just kind of slap the food on and it takes 45 minutes to get your food. I see that the customer experience has suffered almost everywhere. And I think that this is tied into the employment market. But you talk in the book, you say their problem is our problem to solve. But like that, it is a real tension between employees' interests and patient or customer's interests. In the case of fertility patients, what do fertility patients want? An answer whenever they darn well please, whenever they call, whenever they ask for it. What do employees want? They want work-life balance. They're saying it like crazy. They don't want to be working until 8 o'clock. They don't want to have to answer emails at 9. But that's what the patient wants. So that's what customers want. They want instant feedback. So this is a huge tension, not just in our field, but that particular example is. So how do you reconcile that tension? Because I don't believe it when people say, oh, employees come first, but customers also come first. At some point, you have to decide.
It's a balance. But again, if it's in the culture of the team of being very patient-centric, they will do it, especially if you also treat your team members well. So yeah, I cannot think in a binary way that it's only about the employee and it's only about the customers. But what I say is, or the saying that their problem is our problem, is that in a lot of places they say, oh, I didn't have my medication. Well, it's not my problem. It's the pharmacy that didn't, send it. Well, no, actually, even if it is not your fault, you make it your problem. and you try to resolve it, and then you go to the root cause of that, and you prevent it. So, we have to analyze all these problems and try to prevent them in the future.
Let's skip ahead a little bit because I want to talk about negotiation. I'm going to skip over accounting just because I don't think it's boring. Best guy to go in there. But I do think that people should buy your book, even if just for the accounting chapter, especially prospective practice owners, for those younger docs that are thinking of opening a practice. Buy MedikalPreneur just for, I think it's chapter 5 on accounting that talks about where Paco gives a sample income statement, profit and loss statement. And I think just by
we compare it to a patient in the intensive care unit. It is the same. And the 3 things that you ought to know, which is the balance sheet, the profit and loss, and the pro forma or cash flow, is like entering and seeing a patient in ICU. That's the analogy that I use there. And it's very, very easy for a physician to understand if they go and think that way.
But you also start off with numbers in there that people can at least use as a baseline to see this is how far I might be off from that, but it's very useful. And so, but I want to talk about negotiation because there are a lot of younger docs that listen to this show, and you have a diagram on page 185 where you show the overlap. And in this instance, you're talking about negotiating rent, but the landlord has a range of where they've got alternatives and other options of what they would love to get, and the tenant has other options, and they have an area of what they would love to get, and there's some overlap between those two, and that overlap is not one point, it's a range of points.
It's a range.
And in this case, it's the
area of possible deal.
The most that the tenant would ever pay in this particular instance is $8,500 a month. That's the most that the tenant would ever pay. The least that the landlord would ever rent it for is $7,000. And so that's the overlap in this case. In the instance of getting to this overlap, the conventional wisdom has said, always say the first number first. Never say the first number. Never say the first number. My experience tells me otherwise. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you are delving into the technique of the bargaining, which is different than the negotiation.
All right, so zoom us out. So what comes before
the negotiation is basically you have to look at all the variables that you are going to bargain. So is it only if you focus only on the salary, you're kaput. I mean, you're just limiting yourself. But you have to, that's why being creative is good for negotiation. You have to think of ways that are positive sum game. What are the things that the two parties can actually benefit from versus something that in the bargaining is a zero-sum game. The bargaining is a zero-sum game, and it is what it is, and there are specific techniques. I think I mentioned one in the book of how to do it. But I think that the negotiation has to be bigger than that as to where do you do the negotiation, the timing, the presence, what you want to ask, have you study your needs and their needs. But
the information that you garner before the negotiation, before the bargaining, for sure.
And not only from them, but from you. I think that is the most important negotiation is within is what is my walk-out point? If you enter into a negotiation without understanding or knowing your walk-out point, you're dead. You have to know that if I will never pay $1 million for this, right? Or the most I will pay for this pen is $20. So yeah, I might start, getting this and that. But whenever the other side says it's 22, and it's not moving from there, bye, because I know my walkout point is 20. But if you enter without knowing what you want, what is your walkout point, then you will never, you get into the emotion of the bargaining, and you get lost. You get lost. So you have to know what is, because if not, you do the negotiation, you're going to be so angry at yourself that you obtain this red herring up here, but what it was important for you, you didn't get it. So the walkout point is not one point in the number. It is like, it could be days, it could be vacations, it could be places, it could be bonuses. I don't know what is your walkout point, but everybody has different. The city where you're going to live, if you're negotiating for something outside. So I think the most important message would be know your walkout points, learn one or two techniques of bargaining, and 3 is be creative. Think outside of the box so you can create positive sum game instead of a negative sum game or a zero sum game.
And establishing that value in the other person's eyes before the bargaining is also going to help you get to the ceiling. It may even get you past what they originally thought was the ceiling of their bargaining. I think about this all the time now, Pago, that if I were going to go interview for a job, now that I've interviewed so many people and I know what I'm looking for, I feel like I would just totally disrupt I feel like I would just crush the interview process now. And part of the reason is what I see a lot of people not doing is investigating what are the outcomes for the role, and then asking the right questions and showing how really convincing me that they can hit those outcomes. So a lot of people coming in talking about like what kind of person, how hard of a worker they are, their accomplishments, and some of it might relate to the outcomes and some of it might not. Well, what I really want to see somebody discerning the outcomes of the role. And most job descriptions don't have outcomes in the role, but that's a start for you to use as, like, let's say we're talking about a job in this instance. The job has job descriptions. You're going to do IVF cycles. You're going to do IUI. You're going to work in this office. Okay. How many IVF cycles do you want me to be doing after year 1, after year 2? After year, how many, and then how many? So if that's good, what's excellent, and what's the bare minimum that if I don't hit that, this would be a total failure, and then what offices do you want me to open? What procedures do we have in place for that? And so when you can see somebody asking questions about an outcome and they're really discerning, this is what it would take to get the outcome done, then. Like the people that I've sprung the most for, Pago, are the people that in my mind I see like, yeah, this is the person that's going to hit this outcome that I have for them. This is the person that's going to let me walk away from this seat. And when people can do that first, then bargaining is something that comes after later. But the other person, at that point, you've already got the other person thinking like, oh, this is someone who's differentiated.
Well, correct, because he has been thinking through the process, no question.
That chapter on negotiation, I also recommend for any doctor, but especially the younger doctors. Pago, how do you want to conclude? It's your colleagues that listen to the show. Many of them have owned their practice for many years. Some of them might want to start a side venture. Others might just be starting their career and they're thinking about if they're going to open their own practice or if they're going to work for somebody else and start another kind of business. How do you want to conclude the lessons of Medicalpreneur?
Basically, how we started that, yes, you have to change the mindset that, yes, you can be a great business person. Yes, you can be a great entrepreneur, that you have to understand what you're doing. Are you innovating or are you managing? 2 different things. Or are you doing a little bit of both? So then you have to change your hats of how you approach things. To use some of the skills that you use as a physician, read a lot, investigate a lot, question a lot. And most important, be convinced that you can do it. But I hope that more and more in our medical field, we instill some of these concepts, because I think, my daughter is applying to medical school as we speak, and she was one of the ones that read through my book and all this, and she said, wow, so nothing of this is in medical school? I says, no, nothing of this is in medical school. There's also, this is so, there's a lot of things that are so useful. Obviously, my daughter, she's biased, but I think that that was the whole message, that we need to put this into the minds of the physicians, that and actually in a lot of professionals, they don't teach us a lot of these things.
Well, this is one crash course that people can take. They can get it at MedikalPreneur.com. Medicalpreneur is spelled with a K, or you can go right to Amazon, Medicalpreneur, with a K, by Dr. Francisco Arredondo. We'll link to both of those links in the show notes. Paco, thanks so much for coming back on Inside Reproductive Health. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye, Griffin.
You've been listening to the Inside Reproductive Health podcast with Griffin Jones. If you're ready to take action to make sure that your practice thrives beyond the revolutionary changes that are happening in our field and in society, visit fertilitybridge.com to begin the first piece of the fertility marketing system, the goal and competitive diagnostic. Thank you for listening to Inside Reproductive Health.